Hello, I'm Michael O'Toole. Welcome to another edition of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star's crime podcast. Today is an intriguing one. Our chief reporter Paul Healy has an extended one-on-one interview with Ian Bailey. As you will know, Mr. Bailey stands convicted in the French courts of the murder of filmmaker Sophie Toscan du Plantier. She was beaten to death at her home in Schull in West Cork in December 1996. He was convicted in his absence by a court in Paris in 2019 and given a 25-year sentence. That's despite the offence happening in Ireland. And it's also despite the fact that the Irish Director of Public Prosecutions refused to charge him here. In fact, the DPP ruled on two separate occasions that there simply was not enough evidence to sustain a prosecution here. It's also important to stress that Mr. Bailey has consistently denied any involvement in the murder of Ms. du Plantier. This really is an excellent interview. Paul pulls no punches, and neither does Mr. Bailey.
Ian Bailey, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate your time. I think I was saying to you before we started the call here that, you know, you've done many a documentary now and a podcast. You've been interviewed 1,000 times over, and you'd be hard pressed to find a person in Ireland who does not know about the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier and about your story. But it's a fascinating story, and it's one that continues to captivate people. You know, I don't know if people have necessarily heard you in this kind of long format speaking at length. So I appreciate you doing it with us and sitting down. But may I ask you asked me to speak a bit of Irish. So firstly and foremost, Conas tá tú?
Tá mé go maith, agus tú féin.
Tá mé go maith. That's about as much Irish as I know now, Ian. So we're going to have to.
Well, we might switch to stick to Béla then. Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm going to follow a somewhat unconventional process here where I'm just going to try and have a chat with you because, look, I've spoken to you many times now over the years. So we have, and you have many a time spoken on this topic, and you've been asked the same questions over and over. So we're just going to see where it takes us. There are obviously things I want to discuss with you, but let's see where it takes us. I'd like to firstly just ask you about the here and now, because you are in the process of making your own podcast, which is Ian Bailey in his own words. So tell me a bit about just why did you decide to do this now?
Well, I've wanted to do it for a good while because nobody's actually heard me have my own say on the matter. You know, it's been the commented on by many different people, but nobody's actually heard my account of it. So what I have been doing is recording a series of podcasts. I'm not sure if there are going to be 3 or 4 of them, and I'm almost at the end of that process, and I'm hoping to release episode 1 on St. Patrick's Day.
And how can people access that?
Well, episode 1 will be free on all streaming podcast platforms, and then I have a web domain, ianbailey.net.
Right. And this is it essentially a monologue, Ian? Like, is it just you talking?
Yes, it is. I had been hoping to do it with 2 voices, an interviewee, but that wasn't possible. So it's just me, and I've been writing the script, and then I record the script with my technical man, and then he perfects it, and it'll go out, as I say. Episode 1 will go out, hopefully, on St. Patrick's Day.
This is a story that everyone in Ireland at this stage must be familiar with in some capacity. There's been 2 documentaries, one on Netflix and one on Sky, and it never stopped hitting the headlines. So, to a degree, are you not sick of it? Are you not sick and tired nearly?
Well, I think I have become sort of overwhelmed by it at certain points over the last 26 years. This has been going on for over a quarter of a century now. But I've had my own coping mechanisms, which I developed and learned. And one of them is detachment meditation. So I'm able to function and get on with my own life and creativity at the same time as letting all the stuff externally, you know, just go on.
Do you enjoy the attention to a degree?
No, I don't enjoy the attention. This is it's been used as a sort of stick to beat me up, as though I somehow enjoy it. I deal with it, you know, and I don't think there's anybody else alive who's been put through what I've been put through, and my former partner as well. You know, I've been arrested twice domestically, 3 times on a European arrest warrant. I don't think that's ever happened. And I just deal with I just deal with it the best way I can. And that's all I can do.
But I suppose, was it ever trying for you over the years? Was it ever too much?
Oh, hugely. At certain times, I was completely overwhelmed. Now, somehow I managed to come through that and you know, develop strengths. my beliefs, if you like, my spiritual beliefs have been tested and tried, but they've actually grown stronger. I've got a lot of support from a lot of people, and to this day, here in West Cork, I know there are one or two people who are against me, but then you all can have the odd begrudger or two.
Yeah.
I mean, it robbed me of my career. It robbed me of, I was a journalist, an experienced senior journalist. I still am, although I'm not actively writing for newspapers anymore. It finally, last 2 years ago, it finished up destroying my long-term relationship. So I lost an awful lot of what might have been called reasonable, legitimate expectation.
Yeah.
And as you are probably aware, back in June of 2 years ago, I wrote to Drew Harris as a clean pair of hands and asked him to consider a cold case review. It took a year for him to sanction that cold case review, and that cold case review is ongoing as I speak to you.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, but I suppose just in speaking about the here and now, you've mentioned there that the destruction of your relationship. So was that the catalyst to the end of your relationship with Jules Thomas? The all of the pressure of all of this, or what was?
Yes, I think it was. I think for two individuals to be put through what we were put through, and she stood by, and I'm very supportive of Jules and very sympathetic to her, and I'm also supporting her and helping her in her case against Netflix. She's taking a legal action against them for their 3-part documentary.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it was just too much. It was too much for anybody to be put through, really, and I'm very sympathetic to her.
You forgive me for asking personal questions, but I suppose there's a lot of this already in the public domain, and
fire away.
Whether you've liked it or not, you've become a public figure. So, was that a conversation that you and Jules had? Did she say to you, "This is too much, and I can't be around someone such as yourself anymore"? With all that attention,
not really. No, I mean, she let me know via a third party there back in March of 2 years ago that, as far as she was concerned, our journey was over. It was a big shock for me. I dealt with it. I actually called that particular phase of my life Operation Vacate and Relocate. I had to go into temporary emergency accommodation there for a while. I'm now out of that. It's just too much. And she suffered hugely. I mean, I've suffered too, but she's a woman, and she's a strong woman, but, we're different animals. So.
But did she feel, I don't want to ask questions maybe she could answer, but what was it? I'm getting the sense from you that she felt the public scrutiny and the pressure around being with someone such as yourself, who is nonstop in the media, was too much for her. Would that be fair? Or
I think she's on record of saying that, actually. Yes, and I can understand that. I mean, she's a quiet, retiring sort of artist, and I'm quite an outgoing sort of different sort of personality.
Yeah.
So it was probably easier for me to deal with it than it was for her. But I bless her. I'm sympathetic to her, and I'm supporting her in her case against Netflix.
Yeah. Were there other strains in the relationship other than what was going on in relation to the media attention and that?
Not particularly, no. I mean, I think there's, relationships are relationships, aren't they? And we all know that, they come and maybe they go, and it's a sad thing when they go. But, one has to accept that and move on, which is what I'm trying to do.
Because I had to ask you the question. I mean, obviously, it's a long time ago now, but you were, and you're on record in relation to this that you had assaulted Jules in the past. On 3 occasions.
It's shameful. It was I've accepted responsibility. There was always drink involved. It was shameful. I corrected my behaviour, and I'm eternally shameful to myself for that. But I can't change that. I can only change, the future, really.
And that was when drink was taken, as you said, in all of those occasions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's been passed over and examined and gone through in many different formats. And it's a long time ago, and as I say, we all need to be able to move on.
But none of that had any strain on the relationship in the breakup of the relationship, did it?
No, I don't think so. No.
Right. Okay. I'll move on from that. Sorry, I thought in tandem with speaking about that, it was important to raise that. Look, as you're on record speaking about it, and as you say, you're ashamed of it, and you look back at it as a dark chapter in your life. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to go over chapter and verse everything in relation to the history of this case, because I think people are aware of it. But just to remind people that Miss Toscan du Plantier, French filmmaker, that she had a holiday home down there in Schull, and around Christmas time, 1996, she was discovered murdered at the driveway there of her home. And as people know, you were arrested in relation to it. You were questioned. A year later, again, you were arrested, and you vehemently denied it the whole way through, and it became an absolute media circus surrounding you. May I ask you just? I
mean, just let's put it in context, okay?
Yeah.
I'll say this, and I've said this 1,000 times. I have nothing on my conscience. I have nothing to do with this sad murder of Madame du Plantier. I was the lead reporter on it. I was in the area.
Yeah,
I was former Fleet Street investigative. I worked with the Sunday Times Insight team and various other newspapers and organisations, and I was the lead journalist on it. And then within, I think, 5 weeks of the crime, I was first arrested on the 11th of February, 1997, as was my partner, Jules. And we were both given a very, very hard, rough time by the interrogating guards. And then 12 months later, I was arrested again. And then I think maybe 5 years after the first arrest, Jules was arrested for a second time. So we've been put through an awful lot of unnecessary suffering and Anyway, but
I to be fair, Ian, there were circumstances. I know you have your questions about how the Gardaí handled their investigation and that they pinpointed you, as you say, but there were issues at hand in terms of allegedly you had made. And we'll get to this in more detail. Allegedly had made confessions to people, although I know you dispute that and say it was your dark sense of humor. And then there was the cuts that you had to your arms and to your forehead. Am I right? So there were, and they did a drawing in relation to that. The guards. That's a multi-pointed question, but so right. So it's been accepted by the DPP that I had nothing to do with it, and that the police investigation into me by pinpointing me and putting my name out there was a flawed and prejudiced investigation. Can I stop you there? Is it the case that the DPP have accepted you have nothing to do with it, or is it the case that the DPP decided that there was no evidence in which to charge you?
The DPP's report by Robert Sheehan back in 2001, which we didn't get until 2011 when we were dealing with a Supreme Court appeal against an extradition order, completely, if you read it, it absolutely traduces and rejects any of the police evidence, so-called evidence, and claim that I was the murderer. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very emphatic.
Mm. I suppose if this had happened in modern day and you were taken in for questioning and they were noticing things like cuts on your arms, photographs would have been taken. Is that fair?
I don't know. All I know is back then, and this is 26 years ago, the guards I was dealing with then were very, to put it politely, unsophisticated, and they were determined to put me in the frame. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But and I've been trying to fight that, false narrative. It was a false narrative that they created that I somehow, unexplainedly, without any evidence, without any forensics, without any actual real evidence, that there was maybe what they might want to call, quotes, circumstantial evidence, were out to get me.
Yeah, well, may I ask you about the alleged confessions, right? Because over the years, there were a number of people who came forward and said that they had interactions with yourself where they alleged that you made confessions or alluded to your involvement in the murder of Miss Toscan du Plantier. And I'll give you an opportunity to speak on this, but I'm going to read out One example, I'm going to read out Billy Fuller, right? So in the recent Netflix documentary, he recounted his alleged interaction with yourself, and he said that he went up to your house and you asked him, did you want a glass of cider? And he brought up to you that people were alleging that you stuff about you howling at the moon, and that I'm sure you recall that, and you've denied that. And the quote that I have from him here, he says that you became quite white-knuckled and astonished, and you said, "You fucker, you saw her that day, the day before she was killed. You saw her tight arse and wanted to give her one." And he said that you said he went up to her house at about 2:00 in the morning. She ran away screaming, scared, took a stone to the back of her head, and you realized you went too far. And he took that to mean that you were inferring to him that it was actually, in fact, what you had done. And he was quite scared by that interaction. And he feels that you were essentially confessing to him that day. So what do you say to that?
Nonsense, absolute nonsense. I mean, Billy Fuller, and I don't want to get into personalities,
No, please don't. But just the central allegation that this conversation happened. Did it happen first and foremost?
No. He did come up to the house briefly. I recall that. But what he says, and he also made a statement saying that I had told him that Madame du Plantier and her lover, or one of her lovers, had come round to the Prairie for dinner with myself and Jules. He made that statement actually relatively recently, I think last year. Again, reiterated it. Complete and absolute nonsense.
So, can you recall the conversation you had with him?
Well, no, not exactly. But all I know is whatever Billy Fuller says has to be taken with a very, very big pinch of salt.
But is it feasible that you would have said something to the effect of "you fucker, you did"? And would you have said?
No, I don't think so. That's 26 years ago. I can't remember exactly what was said, but certainly what Billy Fuller said, I said, was not the case.
Right. And then, I'm going to bring up Richie and Rosie Shelley, and they say that they were in a pub in Schull with you, and that after at the end of the night, or to a later point in the night, after a few drinks, that you were allegedly emotional and you were crying, and you said something to the effect of, I did it, I went too far. And they took you quite seriously.
What I actually said, and this was a mantra, a cracked mantra that was used when I was under arrest on the first occasion. The cops, the Garda Síochána, and interrogating officers kept saying, "You did it, you did it, you did it." Mm-hmm. And it was as though, and they told Jules that she was arrested shortly after myself. And not only that, at one point, one of the detectives went into Jules and said, "Oh, Ian's confessed," and she didn't believe that I had, and I hadn't. Mm-hmm. So it's a right mess.
So you think that the Shelleys misinterpreted what you said that night?
Yes, I think they did. And it's interesting to note that their misinterpretation was given 6 months after the New Year's Eve event. Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, I'm going to mention another incident with the young fella in the car that you gave a lift, and his allegation that you said
we're talking about Malachi Reid.
Indeed, Malachi Reid, yes. I'll let you respond in a second, sorry, Ian, but his allegation was that you said you went up there and bashed your brains in with a rock. Did you say that?
No, I didn't. What I said to him was, he asked me how things were going, and I said they were going well until somebody started putting a rumor around that I was the murderer and that I'd done the deed with a block. And he was then.
Did you say bashed your brains? Did you say bashed your brains with a rock?
No, I don't think I did. I think I said to him things were going well until somebody started the rumor, which grew, legs and wings, that I was the killer. And I noticed there in the 64-day case I took against the state, you might remember back in 2014, yes. 2015, Malachi Reid was not called as a witness. And I think if you spoke to Malachi Reid, he would, I don't know, you'd need to talk to him. I think he's in Cork City. I'm not quite sure. I think anyway.
Right.
All of these so-called admissions were actually classified by the DPP's officers as, quotes, alleged informal admissions. Mm-hmm. And the DPP's officer, Robert Sheehan, acknowledged the fact that I have what may be called a dark sense of humour or a black gallows sense of humour, and I made light, and I shouldn't have done, of the fact that I was picking up on the fact it was being said that I was the murderer. And I shouldn't have done that. That was unwise, but I did, and that's history.
So you're saying at the absolute worst here, you had a dark sense of humour and you were making light of the situation on numerous occasions to numerous people.
Well, maybe 4 or 5 occasions, I think. I don't know. But
Dermot Dwyer, who you know who full well who he is, who was involved in the original investigation, he's on this Netflix documentary saying something to the effect of there's 5 million people in this country. Isn't it amazing that only one of them is going around constantly talking about murdering this woman? What do you say to that?
Well, I haven't seen the Netflix.
That's effectively what he says, and I rewatched some of it there last night just to refresh myself. The quote is, "It's amazing out of the 5 million people that there's only one fella ever talking about killing her," and he's referring to you.
Well, I don't know because I haven't seen it, but all I know is that Dermot Jeremiah O'Dwyer, former chief detective superintendent, retired.
Yeah.
Also in the Netflix, he says that I somehow burnt a coat or destroyed a coat, a black coat that I was wearing. Now, that was easily disproved as a lie because when you look at the list of items that were taken from me on my first arrest and then returned to me, number 1 item is a long black coat. I never got it back from the guards, and nobody ever explained what happened to it, rather like the blood-stained gate at the entrance to Madame de Plantier's cottage. It just disappeared.
Just in mentioning the coat, there was a lady who stayed with yourself and Jules around that time, Ariana Barina, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, a foreign student who was staying with you, and she recounts seeing this particular coat being washed or being soaked in a bucket in the bathroom, and she thought that was unusual. What do you say to that?
It's total nonsense to suggest that there was a black coat being soaked in a bucket at the Prairie after the event, and it's not only provable because I'm actually seen wearing that black coat at the Christmas Day swim in Schull on the Christmas Day of 1996.
Right. And when it comes to the cuts, the cut to your forehead and the cuts to your arms, can you see how... Well, I know you're going to explain that in a second, but can you see how the average punter who is just hearing about this story and reading about it, and they hear your explanation about culling turkeys and cutting Christmas trees, can you see how the average punter might think that's quite farcical, an explanation?
Well, they may think it. I don't know if they do think it's farcical. It was true that I did kill a turkey, and I got a slight scratch on the top of my head, above my hairline, and then in taking down the top of a Sitka spruce Christmas tree, well, we were trying to save money, actually, rather than buying a Christmas tree. So I went up the tree with Sophie, Jules' eldest daughter, on the ground, and I saw the top of the tree and dragged the top of the tree down through the tree, and I got a few light, non-blood scratches, marks on my arms.
When was that?
And that would have been on the Sunday, the 22nd of December. That's to say the day before the body was found.
Because am I right in saying, I certainly in researching the case, there are witnesses who recall seeing cuts on you following Sophie Toscan du Plantier's murder, but not the day before?
I don't know. All I know is that it's nonsense to suggest that I had anything to do with it, and that those marks and slight scratches that I had on my arms came from the assault. Absolute nonsense.
Right. I'm nearly giving you. I'm just giving you the greatest hits of accusations against you, Ciaran. But we could speak for an hour. But in terms of
we could speak for several hours. But
we could. But in terms of, as you said, you were a journalist and you were one of the first on the scene. I think you were first on the scene. You knew very early on that this was a French lady that had been killed. And there's allegations out there that you had told people that you had crime scene photos as early as 11 o'clock in the morning, and you knew an awful lot of information that nobody else knew.
Absolute nonsense.
Right.
I turned up there.
What did you know at 11 a.m.?
Well, I didn't know anything at all about the crime until about 22:02 on the Monday, the 23rd, when I had a phone call from Eddie Cassidy of the Cork Examiner, now the Irish Examiner, and he gave me basic details, and he asked me to go out and make some inquiries ahead of him coming down from Clonakilty.
Yeah.
And I did that. Now, I had knowledge of the fact that because I'd worked for one of, I think the only neighbour that Madame du Plantier had was Alf Lyons and his partner Shirley Foster. And I had knowledge of the fact that next door to Alf Lyons' cottage was a cottage that was owned and sometimes occupied by a French lady. And nothing more than that. It was suggested that I had been introduced to her. Again, an erroneous falsehood. I didn't know her. I'd never been introduced to her.
Well, on that point, as you say, you never met her. You knew of her presence in Schull. You knew that there was a French lady staying in Schull. Is that correct?
I didn't know. Well, all I knew when I had a phone call from Eddie Cassidy, and he did suggest it was a foreign national, and I actually found my notebooks there quite a while back, possibly French. And then I was going to drive to the post office. There was a post office in Tormore at the time, run by a lady the post office is now long closed. My Nan German was the postmistress. And on the way to the post office, I met with Shirley Foster, who was driving her car away from the cottages, as it were, towards Schull. And I asked her, I said, have you seen anything of the guards around? And she said, yes, they're all up the lane. So Shirley Foster drove on, and I drove towards the scene. I was with Jules. It was that, so that was timed at around about 2:20 in the Garda log. I made some inquiries. I was a good distance away from the actual scene. Two guards wandered up the track towards me, Billy Byrne and another one. And I said to them, I was there for the Examiner. Was there any information forthcoming? And they said, no, any information will have to come through Garda Central Press Office in Dublin. And at that point, I retreated. I went to the post office. And they'd heard of the incident.
Right.
And then I got on with reporting what little I knew. And then I went back up there later on with Mike Brown, a photographer, Reuters photographer, and Eddie Cassidy was there. And I spoke with JP Toomey, as did Eddie Cassidy, and there was very little information being given out at that particular point.
Yeah, because look, the allegation is you knew an awful lot very early, and you've attributed that in the past to your sources. Is it fair to say that you knew a lot? Is it fair to say you knew a lot quite early on?
Well, I mean, you know what it's like when you're a journalist. You ask questions, don't you? You know. And, I was asking questions. I was picking up strands of information, and I was just doing my job. And I was a very good reporter. I probably still could be.
Okay. I don't want to linger on all of this for too long in terms of repeating old history. But you mentioned the fact that you didn't know Sophie. You knew of a French person is possibly staying there in that house. You know of Agnes Thomas, a friend of Sophie Toscan du Plantier, and she can recall having a conversation with Sophie prior to her murder, where she says that Sophie was talking about meeting a man who writes poems, and that the man wanted to meet her to talk about a project around poetry, and that she found him odd, and she found him a bit worrying as a character. And she said, don't see him alone, don't see him in a public place. She fully believes that Sophie was speaking about you. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know, because, all I know is that I didn't know her. I wasn't introduced to her. I have no knowledge of her. other than that she was a French citizen, and I think maybe Alf Lyons told me that she worked in television or film. I'm not quite sure, one or the other.
Right.
So I can't explain what other people have said, which I know to be untrue. I cannot. You'll have to go to them and ask them about that.
Is it possible, Ian, that you had some sort of contact with her? And I know
well,
this sounds a bit...
I'm not aware that I did.
Right.
I didn't know her. As I said, was never introduced to her. I think she was relatively quite private. I mean, a few people on the Mitten Peninsula seem to know her. She was friendly with Tommy, now past Tommy Ungerer, and his wife Yvonne.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was particularly well known. I think she was quite quiet and retiring.
Oh, there are many people, though, Ian, who contradict and say that they believe that you had contact with Sophie. And Guy Girard is another example. And he says that Sophie had said that she was speaking to you and that you were interested in stories of domestic violence and that you wanted to speak to her. And so it's another individual who says that Sophie was speaking to them about you, and that she had prior knowledge of you, and that you had expressed wanting to meet her and to discuss this project and to discuss domestic violence. I mean, what is are all these people making it up, or are they misremembering?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them, but certainly it is untrue. I think Guy Girard may be part of the family group of the thing. No, I mean it's untrue. It's absolutely untrue.
Right.
And, people should ask themselves this question as well if they've got any doubt. Do they think that somebody who could have done this terrible, terrible crime could have survived for 26 years, always fighting to clear their name? And, I went up to UCC for a number of years, 5 years, and came away with 3 degrees of law. Could anybody who had done that crime have survived as long as I have? I don't think so. There were a number of strands that were never followed up. There was an unexplained suicide of a German national who lived nearby, who returned to Germany and killed himself, and apparently left a letter saying he'd done something terrible, but that was never investigated. From the moment the guards first decided to put me in the frame, there was no serious investigation. Because it's a bit like the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four. Once you've decided to put people in the frame, and there's only one of me, well, there was 4 and 6 of them, you don't bother going down any genuine investigative tracks, because if you do, you're going to undermine the false narrative that you're framing to put somebody in the frame.
May I ask you? I'm going to ask you briefly about Maria Farrell. I don't want to get into this too much because it's complicated. But the guards who originally investigated this case would say, not all of them, but Dermot Dwyer would say that Maria Farrell didn't change her story for 10 years. That she said she was in fear of you, and she said that you had threatened her, and she said her original version of events was she was the person who supposedly spotted you at Kailfada Bridge, placed you there close to the crime, and we know that she has since retracted that story and changed her story and said that she was pressured by the guards. But I'm going to ask it this way: taking that into account, that in her original story she said she was in fear of you, and she said that you threatened her, and then with the incidents of violence against Jules in the past, and the fact that you're quite a big and imposing man, I've met you, you're a big fella. Can you see how people when your name came out as a suspect and all of this detail came out, can you see how women in Schull and elsewhere may have feared you? And I'm going to ask you that question directly. Should the women of Ireland fear Ian Bailey?
Right. Well, to answer your last question first, not at all, no. Now, there was an immense effort put into trying to put me in the frame. I never intimidated Maria Farrell. And in fact, Maria Farrell has told her story. She was, in effect, the guards had some leverage on her because there was something going on. I don't know very much about it. And they persuaded her to make false statements. I got some of the statements during one of the cases, and we looked at them. And some of the statements started off dated on one date, and when they were finished, They were dated on another date.
Yeah.
And they were manufactured statements. And I think it's been long accepted, certainly by a large number of people, that her statements, she was browbeaten into believing that I was the murderer. Don't forget, they went to a lot of, oh, look, he is the killer, he is the killer.
Mm-hmm.
That's called, it's called suggestibility. Once you've sort of sown doubt in somebody's mind, you can get them up to almost say and agree with anything. And that's what happened with Maria Farrell. Bless her. And I've long forgiven her for her false statements. And
right.
She's long, told the truth.
Right. I'll come back to that in a moment, but just on the point about, as I said, you're a big imposing guy. People have made allegations over the years that you're a different guy after a few drinks, and that you're quite a scary, an imposing individual. And this is not my words. As I said,
whose words are they then, if they're not your words?
Well,
whose words are they?
Well, I'm speaking for obviously Maria Farrell has retracted her statement about you being threatening, and then Jules herself, she was very badly assaulted by yourself. You had clumps of hair pulled out. So when people read those details in isolation, is what I'm saying to you, Ian. Is there another Ian Bailey? Is there an Ian Bailey that people don't see?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
A violent man. Are you a violent man? And that question, like I asked you, you said women shouldn't fear you, but when they see these details of prior assaults and alleged intimidation, that's why I'm asking you that question.
No. So the question is what exactly?
Well, should anyone have reason to fear you?
No, absolutely not at all. The only people that need to be afraid of me are those who lied and conspired to create the false narrative. Mm-hmm. But nobody else should.
So we're coming now to the other side of the story. As you say, there are other versions out there that have never been explored, other people that suspects you believe need to be looked at. What do you think? If it wasn't you, Ian, who was it? You see, I can't prove. You can have a theory, can't you? Yeah. And as a journalist, I mean, when I was active as a journalist, I would copper bottom any things that I was going to say were fact. Mm-hmm. All I know is there was a huge amount of effort put in by the guards and Dermot Dwyer into putting me into the frame for a crime I had nothing to do with. And it's tarnished, and it's taken up 26 years of my life. Yeah, but surely, sorry to interrupt you, but surely, as you're a journalist, you're someone with interest in the story, regardless of that. And you probably know the story inside out more than most. You must have a theory. What do you think happened?
Well, I mean, clearly, there was one theory that it was horses in a field next door to where she lived that had committed the crime or killed her. Well, I think that one can be completely rejected. Clearly, she died at somebody's hand. There were a number of strands of evidence that were not followed up. There was a car that was speeding away, a blue Ford Fiesta that was seen speeding away that almost caused the man to crash on the Monday morning at around about 7:30. That man was driving up from Goleen up to Cork. He reported that to the guards on the 24th, Christmas Eve, and that statement was never followed up.
Right.
And I mean, the reason I think I remember seeing a quote from Dermot Dwyer, I think it was in Paris Match once, saying, "We knew who it was from day one." He I think it was, I don't know this, decided to put in the frame. And, from that point on, my life became, severely affected. And I'm still, you're asking me these questions now, today, 26 years on, so it's still going on. I mean, I just focus on the here and now, where I am now. I love poetry. I always have. I was a poet before I became a journalist. Yeah. And I, try to make the best of a bad job. Also, You've got the fact that Jim Sheridan who brought out the Murder at the Cottage documentary for Sky TV. I think he's in LA at the moment. I noticed there that he had an independent pathologist report done on.
So this is the story that was in the Irish Mirror there yesterday by John Kieran's, and Mr. Sheridan told him. I'm just telling our listeners who haven't read the story that he had an independent post-mortem that was done, and the determination of that was strangulation. Is that right?
I think what he said was may have been strangled. I think
Yeah,
what he said. Yeah, not absolutely conclusively, but
before the blunt object, before the rock was used.
The coup de grace, I think the French call it.
Yeah. Because, look, if you're looking at it from an amateur sleuth point of view, when you see the weapon that was used, it almost feels more like a crime of opportunity rather than, say, a premeditated, planned hit, if you get me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it always struck me as very strange that the husband, and Madame de Plantier was the third wife of Daniel Toscan du Plantier, who's now dead. I think he died a good few years ago now. Who was head of the national French film company, Unifrance, didn't journey to Ireland to identify the body. And I mean, I always thought that was very, very strange.
Yeah.
And I also ascertained from two sources, reliable, that there was a large amount of insurance money on Madame de Plantier's life. Now, who stood to benefit by her death? With a crime, you quite often ask, the Latin phrase is used, qui bono, who benefits? Who gains from a crime? And you look for a motive in that direction. And that was never considered, and I don't know why.
It's hard, though, for a lot of people to believe in, and even for myself. I'll be brutally honest about this. So I was down in Schull in, I think, 2021, and we were doing a feature piece after the emergence of these documentaries. And we tried to find the house where Miss Toscan du Plantier lived. Now, obviously, once you ask somebody for directions, you'll find it because everybody knows it now, for obvious reasons. But I would put to you that in 1996, certainly, without Google Maps especially, and even with Google Maps, it is an especially difficult house to find. If you're not a local, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't be able to find it.
Oh, no, you wouldn't. You could spend a month of Sundays trying to find it. It's down at the end of an isolated blind boreen. In other words, a boreen that just sort of peters out into wilderness and the mountainside. Yeah. No, it's very, very difficult to find.
But so how could anybody other than a local, especially in 1996, carry out that murder?
Well, I don't know because I know the house was actually bought for her by her husband, Daniel Toscan du Plantier, back in the early 1990s. I don't know if I think he did come over on a number of occasions. So it would have been known to people in France, Mm-hmm. But look, I'm almost sick and tired of saying this, but I will always say it. I have nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And there is a cold case review now, which I'm hoping is going to maybe shed light on the true identity of the murderer. Mm-hmm. I am standing by, and I've said this, and I'm prepared to assist the guards in any way that I can. I had anticipated they may have been in touch with me by now because it's been going on it's been going on since June, I think, of last year. Yeah. They haven't been in touch with me. As soon as they are, I'm prepared, very happy to talk to them and answer any questions they may want to ask of me. Mm. And my prayer has always been, for my sake and Jules' sake, and maybe the family's sake, that the true identity of the murderer emerges before. I'm getting older now. We're all getting older. Before I'm dead and gone.
Right.
It would be very, nice. You hear of people, who die and they're branded and this, that, and the other, and then subsequently it turns out they had nothing to do with it. Well, it can't really help you when you're dead, can it? But
right.
Anyway.
Is that vindication important to you at this stage?
I think so. I very much so. I mean, I'll fight till my final breath. To try to do whatever I can. And I think this cold case review is potentially might offer some light. I understand that there are inquiries being made in France, certainly. Interpol have been brought into it. Mm. I know there are people in the UK who were never contacted in the first instance. I don't know what they can say who've been contacted. So, and I'm just... Go on.
May I ask you, have you prepared yourself for the possibility? You're certainly giving the impression that you don't think this is a possibility, but have you prepared yourself for the possibility that this all comes back to you again and that you end up being suspect number one?
if it does, it's a case of trying to put a round peg into a square hole again. And I think it's interesting to see the reaction of different sections of society down here in West Cork, for instance. I get a lot of support from the younger generation who weren't even alive when this happened. I also get a lot of, and I've got a lot of respect for them, the newer guard, the new younger Garda Síochána, who seem to be a completely different, more, intelligent, maybe better educated than a lot of the people I was dealing with back in 1996, 97, and, over the years.
Right. So you're hopeful that this investigation will clear you, ultimately?
I mean, clear me. I mean, vindication would be lovely. I think the fact is, if it can be established who was the murderer, that is absolute vindication, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And it is my hope and prayer that eventuality comes about.
What is your wish for the person who carried out the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier? Do they deserve to spend the rest of their life?
I don't know. Are they still alive? I mean, that's a big question.
Say they are still alive. What fate does the person who carried out this murder, what do they deserve?
Well, I mean, there's a police cold case review. I'm not, I don't know how that's progressing. I'm hoping that it will lead to the identification and if they're still alive, the apprehension of the person responsible for this. And, then it would be a matter of law, up to law, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I'm only asking your personal opinion. I mean, if you ask that question of most people, they would say, that anyone who carries out murder, it's a heinous crime. They deserve to spend a hefty sentence at least in prison.
I mean, if it is identified and who is the murderer and the murderer is still alive, they will become subject to the criminal justice system, I guess, of this country, and face whatever consequences, a court decides they should face.
Yeah.
It's out of my hands. I mean, as I said, my hope and prayer has always been that, one, that the identity of the killer would come out, and I would, and Jules, you see, Jules has been implicated in this. I mean, the Netflix documentary sort of implies that she's somehow shielding and a party to, this, and she's not. She's, Anyway.
But I suppose I'm asking you more a personal question here, Ian, in terms of, this was a horrible crime. This woman suffered a violent and horrific death. Fair to say, yeah?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on a person who is capable of carrying out that type of offence?
I wouldn't really give it too much thought. As I say, I don't know if the person is still alive. If they are, then, it would be good if they could be caught and brought to justice. In the meantime,
is that person evil? Is that person a monster? What you're not using those words, so I'm not trying to put those words in your mouth, but that's certainly what I would say if you asked me that question. Someone who's capable of carrying out that type of crime and gotten away with it for so long, it's an act of evil. They're an evil person, and they clearly have no morals. What do you say?
Well, I would, I'd agree with you on that. You see, I mean, the thing is, I have a life, outside of this. And you've just taken me back into things that happened, over a quarter of a century ago now. Yeah. At the same time, I mean, I'm prepared to assist, and I will assist the Garda Síochána in any way that I can, if I can. And I would hope there would be some sort of resolution. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, my life goes on. I've got new projects on the go. I try to be as creative as I can. It's sometimes more difficult than others. Sometimes it flows. And my priority at the moment is to get my podcast done and dusted and out there.
I won't linger on this point, Ian, but do you ever think about what happened to Sophie and what she suffered? And does that ever affect you? I know, as you say, it's got nothing to do with you, but given your closeness to the case and knowing what you know and knowing what she went through, just as a human being, what do you ever think, what happened to her was a horrendous, what? Oh,
of course it was horrendous. Of course it was, and I prayed for her. I prayed for her, particularly at the anniversary date of the crime. And, once again, I'm just going to reiterate this. I have nothing to do with it. I have nothing on my conscience. I do hope it is solved before I'm done and gone. I'm looking at the clock, and we've been talking now for
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up, but I just want to ask you two.
I have to go out.
Yeah,
shortly.
I'm going to be quick about this, right? It just Sophie's son. Look, obviously he fully believes that you're responsible for this, and I'm just going to say a quote that he says in the documentary. It's clear he killed her. Everything shows that it's Bailey. There's no question. And he says, "I will make sure the net comes down on Ian Bailey." What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, there's no evidence. I would have been charged, wouldn't I? If there was evidence, I would have been charged in Ireland, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Don't you think? He may say what he wants to say, and I can understand that he lost his mother. Not shortly after he lost his mother, Daniel du Plantier, who he'd been living with, kicked him out of the house as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old boy. He's gone through his own traumas. He's entitled to believe what he believes, wants to believe. All I know is I have nothing to do with it, as God is my witness.
Okay. Ian, thank you for your time. I appreciate you answering those questions again. I know you've been asked them before, but I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And, okay. It was an interesting conversation. I did follow some of the format, but I think it was mostly organic. So thanks very much for your time.